Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything. You guys watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. The night air was thick with the pulse of New York City. Honking taxis, the distant hum of neon signs, and the faint clink of champagne glasses from the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Amara Jackson stood on the narrow ledge of a fourth-floor window, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The black bodysuit hugged her frame, every curve accentuated under the flickering streetlights below. Her breath came in sharp bursts, misting in the cool air, as she glanced down at the alley 4 stories below. One wrong move and she'd be a headline in tomorrow's papers, but Amara wasn't here to fail. Inside the suite behind her, chaos erupted. "Where the hell is she?" A man's voice bellowed, followed by the crash of a glass hitting the floor. Her lips curled into a defiant smirk. Malcolm Sterling, she thought. "You're about to learn I'm not your prize." She tightened her grip on the small folding knife in her hand, her dark eyes scanning the marble pillar beside the window. One chance. That's all she needed. With a deep breath, she leaped. The wind roared in her ears, tearing at her clothes as she slid down the pillar, the rough stones scraping against her palms. Her boots hit the pavement with a soft thud, knees bending to absorb the impact. The alley smelled of damp asphalt and leftover takeout, but to Amara, it was the scent of freedom. She straightened, her breath ragged, and for a split second the world seemed to pause. The neon glow of Times Square in the distance bathed her in a kaleidoscope of colors, red, blue, gold, highlighting the sheen of sweat on her smooth, ebony skin. She was a warrior, a shadow, a woman who refused to be caged. Across the street in the dim interior of a sleek Bentley, Ethan Caldwell froze mid-sip, his wine glass hovering near his lips, his sharp blue eyes locked onto the figure in black now sprinting through the alley. The way she moved, fluid, precise, fearless, sent a jolt through him. He lowered the glass, his jaw tightening. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. The streetlights caught her silhouette, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the curve of her hips, the strength in her stride. His pulse quickened, an unfamiliar heat stirring in his chest. This wasn't just a runaway. This was something else entirely. "Sir," his driver asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. "Follow her," Ethan said, his tone clipped. "And call Javier. I want everything on her now." As the Bentley purred to life, Amara vanished into the shadows of the city, unaware that a pair of piercing eyes had just changed the course of her escape. Hours earlier, Atlanta, Georgia, the chandelier in the Jackson family's Buckhead mansion glittered like a constellation, casting golden light over the sprawling dining hall. The air was heavy with the scent of magnolia blossoms and the soft strains of a jazz quartet playing in the corner. Crystal wine glasses clinked, and the elite of Atlanta politicians, business moguls, and old-money families mingled in their tailored suits and shimmering gowns. At the center of it all stood Amara Jackson, her crimson dress hugging her curves like a second skin. She was a vision of elegance, her dark skin glowing under the warm lights, her coiled hair swept into an intricate updo, but her eyes, sharp and unyielding, told a different story. She stood before a floor-length mirror in the mansion's private study, her fingers tracing the edge of the dress. "I'm not your puppet," she whispered to her reflection, her voice trembling with resolve. For years she'd played the part perfect daughter, poised heiress, the pride of the Jackson family. But tonight, that ended. The door swung open, and her father, Roland Jackson, stepped inside. His gray suit was impeccable, his expression as hard as the mahogany desk behind him. "Amara," he said, his deep voice carrying the weight of authority. "It's time. The guests are waiting." She turned her chin, lifting defiantly. "For what? To parade me like a trophy for Malcolm Sterling?" Roland's eyes narrowed. This marriage secures our family's future. The Sterlings are powerful allies. You don't have a choice." Amara's laugh was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. "No choice." "Watch me!" She grabbed a wineglass from the desk and hurled it at the wall, the crystal shattering into 1,000 pieces. Roland flinched, but his face remained stoic. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The only mistake was thinking you could control me." She shot back, her voice steady despite the fire in her chest. She stormed past him, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, and rejoined the party. The guests parted as she moved, their whispers trailing her like smoke. She felt their eyes judging, calculating, but she didn't care. Not tonight. At the head of the room, Malcolm Sterling stood with a smug grin, his blonde hair slicked back, his tuxedo screaming wealth. He raised a glass to her, his gaze possessive. "To my future bride," he announced, his voice dripping with arrogance. The crowd applauded, but Amara's stomach churned. Malcolm was a spoiled playboy, a man who saw her as a prize to be won, not a person. She'd rather die than let him touch her. She forced a smile, lifting her own glass. "To freedom," she said, her voice loud enough to carry. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but she didn't wait for their reaction. She set the glass down and slipped through a side door, her heart racing. The plan was in motion. Back in New York City, the Plaza Hotel buzzed with energy, its grand ballroom filled with the elite of Manhattan. The occasion, the official engagement party of Amara Jackson and Malcolm Sterling, a union meant to seal a multi-billion-dollar business deal between the Jackson and Sterling families. But the bride had other plans. Amara locked the door of her fourth-floor suite, her hands trembling as she stripped off the crimson gown. The fabric pooled at her feet, replaced by a black bodysuit that felt like armor. She checked her gear, a folding knife, lock-picking tools, a lightweight rope. Every item was a reminder of the skills she'd honed since childhood, not to please her family, but to protect herself. Martial arts, fencing, shooting. She'd learned them all not for grace but for survival. She opened the window, the city's heartbeat flooding in car horns, distant sirens, the low hum of life. The ballroom's music drifted up, a faint jazz melody that made her pause. For a moment she imagined a different life, one where she could dance under those lights, free to choose her own partner. But that was a dream for another day. She climbed onto the ledge, her boots gripping the stone. The marble pillar beside the window was her only way down. She tested it with her knife, the blade scraping against the surface. One chance, she thought. Her pulse thundered, but her hands were steady. She'd trained for this. With a final glance at the suite, its gilded mirrors and velvet curtains, she jumped. The descent was a blur of motion and sound. The wind tore at her, the pillar's rough surface biting into her palms as she slid. Her knife caught a groove, slowing her fall, and she twisted her body to land on her feet. The impact jolted through her, but she stayed upright, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The alley was dark, save for the flickering streetlights that cast long shadows across the pavement. She was free, or so she thought. Across the street, Ethan Caldwell leaned forward in his Bentley, his wineglass forgotten. The woman in black sprinted past her, movements like a dancer's, graceful, lethal. The streetlights caught her face for a split second, and Ethan's breath caught. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes that burned with defiance. She was no ordinary runaway. She was a force. His driver hesitated. "Sir, she's gone." "Should we find her?" Ethan said, his voice low but firm. "I don't care how long it takes." He leaned back, his mind racing. Whoever she was, she'd just ignited something in him. A curiosity, a hunger. And Ethan Caldwell wasn't a man who let things slip away. Amara didn't stop running until she reached Brooklyn. her boots pounding the cracked sidewalks of Dumbo. The city's pulse faded into a quieter rhythm. Here, the air thick with the scent of river water and street food. She slipped into a small apartment, the door creaking as she entered. Her friend Tasha, a bartender with a knack for keeping secrets, was waiting. "Girl, you look like you just robbed a bank," Tasha said, tossing her a bottle of water. Amara caught it, her lips twitching. Close enough. She sank onto the couch, the adrenaline still coursing through her. The apartment was a mess of vinyl records and half-finished paintings, but it felt safe. She pulled out her phone, the screen lighting up with a photo of her and her sister Nia laughing at a jazz festival in New Orleans. Her chest tightened. Nia was the only one who'd understand why she ran. "You sure about this?" Tasha asked, leaning against the counter. "Your family's got reach. They'll find you." "Not if I'm someone else," Amara said. She grabbed a pair of scissors and stood before a cracked mirror. Her long coils fell to the floor, each snip a step toward a new identity. Jade Carter, bodyguard. She'd heard of Ethan Caldwell, the CEO who despised his half-brother Malcolm. If anyone could shield her from the Jacksons and Sterlings, it was him. As she cut her mind, drifted to the man in the Bentley. She'd felt his gaze like a spotlight pinning her in place. Those blue eyes, sharp and unrelenting, had seen her, not just her escape, but her. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. "Focus, Amara," she muttered. There was no room for distractions. In his Manhattan penthouse, Ethan stood before a wall of screens, each displaying security footage from the plaza. Javier Morales, his right-hand man and tech genius, leaned back in a chair, chewing gum. "No clear ID yet," Javier said. "But damn, she's fast. Took out a pillar like it was nothing." "She's not just fast," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on a blurry image of the woman in black. "She's trained military, maybe? Or something else?" He paused, his fingers tapping the desk. "Find her, Javier. I want a name, a history, everything." Javier raised an eyebrow. "You sound invested. What's the deal?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't explain the pull. He'd felt the way her defiance had sparked something in him. All he knew was that she wasn't just a runaway. She was a mystery he intended to unravel. Amara lay on Tasha's couch, the faint strum of a soul record filling the room. Her new haircut felt foreign, but it was a shield, a way to become Jade Carter. She closed her eyes, the image of those blue eyes lingering. Whoever he was, he'd seen her escape. And in a city like New York, that could mean trouble or salvation. What did you think of Amara's daring escape, Will? Ethan, find her, and what happens when their paths collide? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and hit that subscribe button to join the Soul Stories family. Stay tuned for the next chapter of this heart-pounding journey. The glass tower of Caldwell Enterprises gleamed under the Manhattan sun, its steel and chrome facade reflecting the chaos of midtown traffic. Inside, the air was crisp with the scent of polished wood and fresh coffee, the kind that cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. Amara Jackson now. Jade Carter strode through the lobby, her boots clicking on the marble floor. Her cropped hair framed her face sharp and purposeful, and the tailored black blazer she wore hugged her frame, just enough to hint at strength without giving away her secrets. She adjusted the earpiece in her left ear, her dark eyes scanning the room like a hawk. This was her battlefield now, and Ethan Caldwell was her shield or her downfall. The receptionist, a blonde with a smile too perfect to be genuine, glanced up. "Ms. Carter, Mr. Caldwell's expecting you." "Top floor." Amara nodded, her lips twitching into a half-smirk. "Thanks, doll." The word slipped out a nod to her Atlanta roots, and she caught the receptionist's raised eyebrow. "Keep it together, Amara," she thought. Stepping into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflected her new identity. Jade Carter, ex-mercenary, level 1 black belt, and a resume forged with enough precision to fool anyone. Almost anyone. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open to a penthouse office that screamed power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of Manhattan's skyline. The Empire State Building cutting through the haze like a blade. Ethan Caldwell stood behind a mahogany desk, his gray suit tailored to perfection, his blue eyes locked on her the moment she stepped inside. The air shifted, charged with something unspoken. Amara felt it, the weight of his gaze like a spotlight. She couldn't escape. Jade Carter. He said, his voice low and smooth, like whiskey over ice. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You think you've got what it takes to protect me? Amara met his gaze unflinching. Try me, boss. The challenge hung in the air. Her tone laced with just enough defiance to make him pause. Ethan's lips twitched, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. All right. Let's see what you're made of. He gestured to the door. Gym. Now the company's private gym was a sleek space of polished wood and mirrored walls, the kind of place where CEOs pretended to work out while cutting deals. Amara stood in the center of the mat. Her blazer discarded her black tank top, revealing toned arms that glistened under the fluorescent lights. Ethan faced her, his suit jacket gone, his white dress shirt rolled up to the elbows. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of the AC and the steady rhythm of Amara's breath. Rules? She asked, cracking her knuckles. No rules, Ethan said, his eyes glinting. Just don't cry when I pin you. Amara laughed, sharp and bright. Big talk for a guy in dress shoes. He moved first fast and precise, aiming a controlled strike at her shoulder. Amara sidestepped her body fluid like water and countered with a swift jab to his side. Ethan blocked it, his forearm brushing against hers, the contact sending a spark through her. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the heat. This wasn't a dance. It was a fight. They circled each other, the mat creaking under their feet. Amara lunged, feinting left, before sweeping low with a kick. Ethan dodged, but not fast enough. Her boot grazed his thigh, forcing him back a step. The air crackled with tension, their breaths sinking in the quiet. She could hear his exhale, sharp and controlled, and see the sweat beading on his brow, catching the light like diamonds. Not bad, Ethan said, his voice a low rumble. He closed the distance, grabbing her wrist and twisting. Amara spun out of his grip, her body brushing against his chest for a split second. The scent of his cologne, cedar, and spice hit her, and she cursed inwardly. Focus, damn it. She pivoted, using her momentum to hook her arm around his neck from behind, locking him in a chokehold. Her lips hovered near his ear, her breath warm against his skin. 3 seconds, she whispered, her voice husky. That's all it'd take to put you out. Want to test me? Ethan's body tensed, but he didn't struggle. Instead, he chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. You're bold, Carter. I'll give you that. His hand grazed her forearm, a deliberate touch that sent a shiver down her spine. She released him, stepping back, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the fight. He turned to face her, adjusting his cuffs with a maddening calm. You're hired, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. But don't think I'm not watching you. Amara smirked, brushing a bead of sweat from her brow. Watch all you want, boss. I'm not going anywhere. The next few days were a crash course in Ethan Caldwell's world, and Amara quickly learned he was as demanding as he was enigmatic. His mornings started with a list of tasks that made her question her life choices. Pick up his dry cleaning, check his car for bugs, and worst of all, make his coffee. The office kitchen was a nightmare of gleaming machines and overpriced beans, and Amara stared at the espresso maker like it was a bomb. This thing's got more buttons than a spaceship, she muttered, jabbing at the controls. The machine hissed, spitting out a sad dribble of brown liquid. She poured it into a mug and carried it to Ethan's office, her boots scuffing the carpet. He was at his desk, scrolling through a tablet, his tie loosened just enough to make him look human. Amara set the mug down with a thud. "Your coffee, Your Highness." Ethan glanced at the mug, then at her. One eyebrow raised. "You call this coffee? It looks like swamp water." He took a sip, his face twisting. "Tastes like it too." Amara crossed her arms, leaning against the desk. "I'm a bodyguard, not a barista. You want Starbucks? There's one downstairs." He set the mug down, a smirk playing on his lips. "My bodyguard does what I say, and right now I say, learn to brew a decent cup." She rolled her eyes, fighting a grin. "You're killing me, Caldwell." "Good," he said, his voice teasing, but edged with something sharper. "Keeps you on your toes." Their banter was interrupted by Javier Morales, Ethan's tech guy and resident smartass, who strolled in with a laptop under his arm. "Yo, boss, you got a problem," he said, chewing gum like it was his job. "Those clowns from the merger meeting are downstairs, and they're acting shady." Ethan's expression hardened. "Handle it," he said to Amara. "And don't let them near me." She nodded, already moving on it. That night, Amara stood at Ethan's side in a rooftop bar overlooking Manhattan, the city's lights sprawling like a sea of stars. The air was warm, thick with the scent of bourbon and perfume, and the crowd was a mix of Wall Street sharks and socialites in designer dresses. Amara, in a black blazer and slacks, blended into the background, her earpiece buzzing with security chatter, but her eyes were on Ethan, who moved through the room like a predator. Calm, controlled, untouchable, until a group of merger partners cornered her near the bar. The leader, a slick-haired guy with a Rolex that screamed new money, leaned in too close, his breath reeking of gin. "You're Caldwell's new muscle, huh?" he said, his eyes raking over her. "Ever thought about working for someone with deeper pockets?" Amara's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice cool. "I don't switch teams, pal." "Back off!" He laughed, stepping closer, his hand brushing her arm. "Come on, sweetheart, name your price." Before she could respond, a shadow loomed behind her. Ethan's voice cut through the air, low and dangerous. "She's not for sale." His hand landed on her shoulder, firm, but not possessive, pulling her back just enough to put space between her and the creep. The guy froze, his smirk fading under Ethan's glacial stare. "Mr. Caldwell," he stammered, raising his hands, "just making conversation." "Make it somewhere else," Ethan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guy muttered an apology and slunk away, his buddies trailing behind. Amara turned to Ethan, her pulse racing. His hand was still on her shoulder, his fingers warm through her blazer, and the city lights caught the sharp angles of his face. Up close, she could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his eyes darkened when they met hers. The air between them crackled heavy with something neither of them could name. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Ethan's hand lingered for a moment before dropping. "Yeah, I did," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. He stepped closer, his breath brushing her cheek, the scent of his cologne wrapping around her like a spell. "Stay close, Jade. These guys don't play nice." She swallowed, her skin tingling where his hand had been. "I can handle myself," she said. But the words felt hollow. His proximity was doing things to her, dangerous things. She stepped back, forcing a smirk. "You're gonna have to trust me sometime, boss." He didn't smile, but his eyes held hers, intense and unreadable. "We'll see." Later that night, Amara sat on the couch in Tasha's Brooklyn apartment, her phone buzzing with a text from Nia. "Malcolm's people are asking questions." "Be careful, sis." Her stomach twisted. She'd known running wouldn't be easy, but the thought of Malcolm closing in made her blood run cold. She glanced at the mirror. Her new haircut, a stark reminder of the life she'd left behind. Jade Carter was her armor, But Ethan Caldwell was a crack in it. The way he'd looked at her tonight, the way his touch had lingered. It was trouble, the kind she couldn't afford. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Ethan sat at his desk, a glass of bourbon in hand. The security footage from the plaza played on a loop, but his mind was on Jade Carter. Her skills were too sharp, her reactions too polished. She wasn't just a bodyguard, and those moments, the fight, the rooftop, had stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. He opened her file, his eyes narrowing at a discrepancy in her background. "What are you hiding?" "Jade," he murmured. Javier poked his head in, grinning. "Still obsessing over your new hire. Man, you've got it bad." Ethan shot him a look. "Get me everything on her. I want the truth." Javier chuckled, popping his gum. "Oh, you're in deep, boss. Good luck with that." The French Quarter of New Orleans pulsed with life, a kaleidoscope of neon signs, street musicians, and the warm, sugary scent of beignets drifting from Café du Monde. Amara Jackson weaved through the crowded streets, her black hoodie blending into the shadows of the old brick buildings. The air was thick with humidity clinging to her skin, and the distant wail of a saxophone curled around her like a lover's whisper. She'd come here to escape, to find refuge with her sister Naya, after a close call in New York. Malcolm's men had been sniffing around Brooklyn, their questions too pointed, their presence too heavy. Amara's heart hadn't stopped racing since. She slipped into a narrow alley, the cobblestones slick under her boots, and leaned against a graffiti-covered wall. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Nia's name lighting up the screen. "Where you at, sis?" "I'm at the bar. Hurry up." Amara exhaled, her breath misting in the cool night air. Nia was her anchor, the one person who'd always had her back, no matter how deep the mess. But even Nia didn't know the full truth. Not about the organization. Amara secretly funded a lifeline for women escaping men like Malcolm Sterling. That secret was a weight she carried alone. She pushed off the wall, her boots splashing through a puddle, and headed toward the bar. The Quarter's energy was infectious laughter, clinking glasses, the rhythm of jazz spilling from every open door. But Amara's mind was elsewhere, tangled in thoughts of Ethan Caldwell, the way he'd looked at her on that rooftop, his hand warm on her shoulder, his voice a low growl that still echoed in her ears. He was trouble, the kind that could unravel everything she'd fought for, and yet she couldn't shake him. Nia's apartment was a chaotic burst of color tucked above a voodoo shop in the heart of the Quarter. Canvases lined the walls, splattered with bold strokes of red and gold, and the air smelled of turpentine and gumbo simmering on the stove. Nia, her hair in a cascade of braids, flung her arms around Amara the moment she walked in. "Girl, you look like you've been running from the devil himself," Nia said, her voice warm but laced with worry. "Close enough," Amara said, sinking onto a velvet couch. She kicked off her boots, the ache in her legs, a reminder of the miles she'd put between her and New York Malcolm's getting too close. "I can't stay here long." Nia handed her a glass of sweet tea, the ice clinking against the glass. "You can't keep running forever, Amara. You're tougher than anyone I know, but even you need a break." She sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes searching. "What's stopping you from trusting someone like that boss of yours, Ethan, right?" Amara's grip tightened on the glass. "He's not my boss. He's complicated." She took a sip, the sweetness grounding her. "He doesn't even know who I am. Nia, if he finds out, he could hand me back to Malcolm. Or worse." Nia tilted her head, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Or maybe he's the one who'll fight for you." "You ever think about that?" Amara snorted, but the words hit harder than she wanted to admit. She set the glass down, her fingers tracing the condensation. "I don't have time for fairy tales, I just need to stay alive." Nia leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You're not just surviving, sis. You're fighting for something bigger, that organization you're funding. It's saving lives. But you can't do it alone. Let someone in Amara's chest tightened. Nia was right. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. The Blue Note was a hole-in-the-wall jazz bar, its dim interior lit by strings of red bulbs that cast a sultry glow over the crowd. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low, mournful notes of a trumpet solo. Amara sat at a corner table, her hoodie swapped for a fitted black top that hugged her curves. She sipped a bourbon, the burn grounding her as she scanned the room. Nia was across the bar, chatting with a group of artists, her laughter cutting through the music. For a moment, Amara let herself relax, the rhythm of the city washing over her. Then she felt it a prickle at the back of her neck, like someone was watching. Her hand tightened around the glass, her eyes darting to the entrance. And there he was, Ethan Caldwell. He stood in the doorway, his tailored jacket open to reveal a crisp white shirt, his blue eyes cutting through the haze like a blade. The bar's red lights caught the sharp angles of his face, and for a moment Amara forgot how to breathe. He moved toward her, each step deliberate, the crowd parting without him needing to say a word. Her pulse quickened, a mix of fear and something dangerously close to desire. "Jade," he said, his voice low, almost drowned by the music. He slid into the seat across from her, his knee brushing hers under the table. The contact sent a jolt through her, and she shifted, trying to mask it. "What are you doing in New Orleans?" She leaned back, forcing a casual smile. "Taking a break." "You looking for you," he said, his eyes locked on hers. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard, and she swallowed hard. "You left New York in a hurry. Care to explain?" Amara's fingers traced the rim of her glass, buying time. "Just needed some air. City's too loud sometimes." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Don't play games with me, Jade. I know you're hiding something." His hand rested on the table close enough that she could feel the heat of it. The bar's lights danced in his eyes, and she felt the air between them thick and heavy with unspoken questions. Before she could respond, the band shifted into a slow, sultry jazz number, the kind that made your skin hum. Ethan stood, extending a hand. "Dance with me?" It wasn't a request. Amara's heart skipped, but she took his hand, her fingers brushing his calloused palm. The contact was electric, a spark that traveled up her arm. He led her to the small dance floor, the crowd fading into a blur of color and sound. His hand settled on her waist, firm and warm, pulling her close. Her breath caught as their bodies aligned, the heat of him seeping through her thin top. The music wrapped around them, a slow pulsing rhythm that matched the thud of her heart. "Your trouble," she murmured, her lips close to his ear. The scent of his cologne, cedar, and smoke filled her senses, making her dizzy. "You have no idea," he said, his voice a low rumble. His hand slid lower, resting just above her hip, and she felt the press of his fingers through the fabric. The red lights cast shadows across his face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. They moved together, her body swaying against his, each step a silent conversation. Her hand rested on his shoulder, feeling the taut muscle beneath his shirt, and for a moment she let herself imagine what it would be like to let go, to let him in. The song ended, but neither moved. His breath was warm against her cheek, his lips hovering dangerously close to hers. "You can't hide from me forever," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She pulled back, her heart racing. "This is a bad idea," she said, but her voice trembled, betraying her. "Then why does it feel so right?" He countered, his eyes searching hers. Before she could answer, a drunk patron stumbled into them, breaking the spell. Amara stepped back, her skin tingling where his hands had been. "I need air," she said, turning toward the exit. Ethan followed his presence, a shadow she couldn't shake. The rain came sudden and fierce, drenching the quarter streets in a curtain of silver. Amara stepped into an alley, the cobblestones slick under her boots, the rain soaking her top until it clung to her skin. She tilted her head back, letting the water cool her flushed cheeks. The bar had been too much. Ethan's touch, his words, the way he saw through her. She was losing her grip, and that scared her more than Malcolm's men. Footsteps splashed behind her, and she spun her hand, instinctively reaching for the knife in her pocket. Ethan stood there, his shirt plastered to his chest, rain dripping from his hair. The streetlight cast a halo around him, making his eyes glow like sapphires. "You're running again?" he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. "I'm not running," she lied, her voice steady, despite the storm in her chest. "I just need space." He stepped closer, undeterred by the rain. "You don't get to walk away from this." His hand reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. The touch was gentle, but it burned, igniting something deep inside her. She froze, caught between fear and want. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't know me." "Then tell me," he said, his voice raw. He stepped closer, backing her against the brick wall. The rain ran in rivulets down his face, catching the light, and she could see the hunger in his eyes, the need that mirrored her own. His hand slid to her jaw, tilting her face up. "Who are you, Jade?" Her breath hitched, the world narrowing to the space between them. The rain drowned out everything, her doubts, her fears, the city itself. She felt the rough brick against her back, the heat of his body inches from hers. And then he kissed her. His lips were hot, demanding a stark contrast to the cold rain. The kiss was a storm of its own, fierce and unrelenting, stealing her breath. Her hands gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, the wet fabric bunching under her fingers. His tongue brushed hers, a spark that sent shivers down her spine. She tasted bourbon, and rain felt the thud of his heart against her chest. His hand slid to her waist, fingers digging into her skin, and she arched into him, lost in the heat of it. The world spun, and for a moment nothing else existed. Just his lips, his touch, the rain washing away her walls, but reality crashed back sharp and brutal. She pushed him away, her chest heaving. "We can't," she gasped, her voice trembling. "You don't know who I am." Ethan's eyes blazed, his breath ragged. "Then tell me," he said again. But there was no anger, only a desperate need to understand. She shook her head, rain streaming down her face. "I'm not who you think." She turned ready to run, but something fell from her pocket. A folded piece of paper. Ethan grabbed it before she could, his eyes scanning the contents. It was a receipt, a donation to a women's shelter, signed with her real name, Amara Jackson. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're not just running from a marriage, are you?" he said, his voice low. "What's this about Amara?" Her heart stopped. He knew her name. There was no going back now. Amara stood frozen, the rain blurring her vision. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm trying to help people. Women like me trapped by men like Malcolm." Ethan stepped closer, the paper still in his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was softer now, but the intensity in his eyes hadn't faded. "You think I'd turn you over to him?" "I don't know what you'd do," she admitted, her voice raw. "I don't know you." He reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek. "You know me better than you think." The rain slowed to a drizzle, the streetlight casting long shadows across the alley. "I'm not letting you go, Amara. Not now." She swallowed, her heart torn between fear and hope. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed a text from Naya. "Malcolm's men are in the quarter. Get out now." Her blood ran cold. She looked at Ethan, his face a mix of determination and something deeper. Something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. He nodded, his hand brushing hers as they turned to leave. "Together," he said, and the word felt like a promise. The Pacific Ocean roared below the cliffs of Big Sur, its waves crashing against jagged rocks in a symphony of raw power. The wooden cabin, perched on the edge of the coastline, was a study in contrasts. Rustic beams warmed by the glow of a stone fireplace, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the stormy sea. Beyond, Amara Jackson stood by one of those windows, her silhouette sharp against the flickering light of the fire. Her black sweater clung to her frame, the sleeves pushed up to reveal toned forearms, and her short hair was still damp from the coastal mist. The air smelled of pine and salt, a heady mix that grounded her even as her heart raced. She'd come here at Ethan's insistence, a supposed business trip to secure a client. But the moment they'd arrived, she'd known it was a lie. The way he'd looked at her in New Orleans, the way his lips had claimed hers in that rain-soaked alley. It wasn't about business. It was about them. And that terrified her. Ethan stood across the room, pouring 2 glasses of bourbon from a decanter. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin, and his blue eyes caught the firelight as he glanced at her. "You're quiet tonight, Jade," he said, his voice low, teasing. Or should I say, Amara? Her breath caught, but she kept her face neutral, turning to face him. "You think you've got me all figured out, don't you, Caldwell?" She crossed her arms, her tone light but edged with defiance. The fire crackled behind her, its warmth a stark contrast to the storm brewing outside. He smirked, crossing the room with a predator's grace. "I'm getting there." He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers, the contact sending a spark through her. She took the bourbon, her eyes never leaving his, and the air between them thickened heavy with unspoken truths. "You're not just running from Malcolm," he said, his voice dropping. "That shelter you're funding. What's it mean to you?" Amara's grip tightened on the glass, the amber liquid catching the firelight. "It means freedom," she said, her voice steady but laced with something raw, "for women who don't have a way out. Women like I could have been." She took a sip, the burn grounding her. "You wouldn't get it?" Ethan's eyes darkened, but not with anger. "Try me." She hesitated, the weight of her secret pressing against her chest. For years, she'd kept it locked away, a shield against the world. But standing here with the ocean roaring and Ethan's gaze pinning her in place, she felt the walls crumbling. "I was 17, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a guy. Thought he loved me, but he was just another Malcolm using me to get to my family's money. When I broke it off, he—" She paused, her jaw tightening. "He didn't take it well. I got out, but not everyone does. That's why I fund the shelter, to give them a chance." Ethan was silent, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met, Amara. But you don't have to do this alone." Her heart twisted a mix of fear and longing. "You don't know what you're signing up for," she said, turning back to the window. The storm outside was picking up rain, lashing against the glass, a mirror to the chaos inside her. He set his glass down, closing the distance between them. "Then show me," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. The storm hit full force an hour later, the wind howling like a living thing, rattling the cabin's windows. Amara had gone outside to check the perimeter, a habit from her bodyguard days when the rain caught her, soaking her to the bone. She stumbled back inside her sweater, clinging to her skin, water dripping from her hair. The fire's warmth hit her like a wave, but it did nothing to calm the storm in her chest. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. "You don't have to do this alone." But trust was a risk she wasn't sure she could take. She peeled off her sweater, tossing it onto a chair, and stood in the bathroom doorway, her thin silk camisole clinging to her curves. The firelight cast golden shadows across her skin, highlighting the strength in her shoulders, the soft dip of her waist. She reached for a towel, her movement slow, unaware of the door creaking open behind her. Ethan froze in the doorway, his breath catching. The sight of her rain-slicked, vulnerable, yet undeniably powerful, hit him like a punch. The camisole was nearly translucent, revealing the lines of her body, and the firelight danced across her ebony skin, making her glow like a goddess. His pulse quickened, a low heat stirring in his gut. "Amara," he said, his voice rough, barely audible over the storm. She spun her eyes wide, clutching the towel to her chest. "Ethan, what the—" Her words faltered as she saw the look in his eyes, raw and unguarded. The air between them crackled, charged with a tension that had been building for weeks. The rain pounded against the windows, a relentless drumbeat, and the fire's crackle filled the silence. "You're not Jade." "Carter," he said, stepping closer, his voice steady but laced with certainty. "You're Amara Jackson, and I've known it since New Orleans." Her heart stopped, her hands trembling as she gripped the towel. How she whispered, her voice barely audible. He closed the distance, stopping just inches from her. "The way you fight, the way you move. It's not just training. It's you." And that receipt in the alley. It was a dead giveaway. His eyes searched hers, intense and unrelenting. "You're not just running from Malcolm. You're fighting for something bigger. Why didn't you tell me?" She swallowed her throat dry. "Because I didn't know if I could trust you," she admitted, her voice raw. "I still don't." His jaw tightened, but his voice was soft. "You think I'd hand you over to him after everything?" He reached out, his fingers grazing her arm, the touch sending a jolt through her. "I'm not that guy, Amara." The storm outside roared, but it was nothing compared to the one inside her. She felt the heat of his hand, the weight of his gaze, and something inside her snapped. She dropped the towel, stepping closer, her voice fierce. "Then prove it." He didn't hesitate. His hands cupped her face, and he kissed her hard and desperate, like a man drowning. The kiss was fire-consuming, stealing her breath. His lips were hot, tasting of bourbon and rain, and she melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. The silk of her camisole brushed against his chest, the thin fabric a flimsy barrier between them. His fingers slid to her waist, digging into her skin, and she gasped against his mouth, the sound swallowed by the storm. The world narrowed to the heat of his touch, the press of his body, the rhythm of their breaths. Her hands roamed his back, feeling the taut muscle beneath his shirt, and she arched into him, her skin tingling where his fingers grazed. The firelight cast their shadows on the wall, a dance of light and shadow, and the rain's relentless drumbeat drowned out everything but the thud of her heart. He pulled back his forehead, resting against hers, his breath ragged. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice a low growl. "And I will." She looked into his eyes, seeing the hunger, the need, the promise. "Don't?" she whispered, her voice trembling, but sure. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring every moment. His hands slid up her sides, tracing the curve of her ribs, and she shivered, her body alive under his touch. The storm outside faded, replaced by the heat between them, a fire that burned brighter than the one in the hearth. But before they could cross that final line, a sharp buzz cut through the air, Ethan's phone vibrating on the table. He cursed under his breath, pulling back his hands still on her waist. "This better be good," he muttered, grabbing the phone. His expression darkened as he listened, his eyes flicking to Amara, Mom. "This isn't the time." Amara's stomach twisted. Lila Caldwell. She stepped back, the spell broken. Her skin still tingling from his touch. Ethan's voice was clipped as he spoke, but his eyes stayed on her, intense and unyielding. "No, I'm not coming back tonight, and no, I don't care what you think about her." He paused, his jaw tightening. "You don't get to control this." He hung up, tossing the phone onto the couch. "Lila," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. She's got a problem with you. Always has. Amara's heart sank. Why, she asked, though she already knew Lila. Caldwell was old money, the kind of woman who saw Amara as an outsider, a threat to her perfect world. Ethan hesitated, his eyes searching hers. She told me something tonight, he said, his voice low. About my father. She betrayed him years ago. Had an affair with Malcolm's dad. That's why she's so hell-bent on keeping me in line. She thinks you'll ruin everything, just like she did. The revelation hit Amara like a wave, cold and sharp. And you believe her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek. I believe in you, he said, his voice fierce. I don't care what she thinks. I choose you, Amara. Her breath caught the weight of his words sinking in. She wanted to believe him, to let go of the fear that had held her back for so long. But the storm outside was a reminder of the chaos waiting for them. Malcolm, her family. The secrets she couldn't outrun. Later that night, Amara sat by the fire, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Ethan was across the room pouring another drink. His movements tense. The rain had slowed to a gentle patter, but the air was still heavy, charged with the aftermath of their kiss. She could still feel his lips, his hands, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. We can't stay here, she said, breaking the silence. Malcolm's getting closer. I got a text from Nia in New Orleans. His men are everywhere. Ethan turned, his eyes narrowing. Let him come, he said, his voice cold. I'm not letting him touch you. She stood, the blanket falling to the floor. This isn't just about me, Ethan. If he finds out you're helping me, he'll go after you, your company, your family, everything. He crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. You think I'm scared of him? His hand brushed her arm, a gentle touch that belied the fire in his eyes. I've been fighting my whole life, Amara, for control, for my name, for something real. And you, he paused, his voice softening. You're the realest thing I've ever found. Her heart twisted, a mix of fear and hope. She wanted to believe him, to let herself fall. But the weight of her secrets, the danger closing in, it was too much. What happens when he finds us? She asked, her voice trembling. Ethan's hand slid to her waist, pulling her close. We fight, he said, his voice a low growl. Together. The fire crackled, casting their shadows on the wall, and for the first time, Amara felt a flicker of hope. But in the back of her mind, she knew the storm was far from over. Malcolm was coming, and with Lila's betrayal laid bare, the stakes were higher than ever. The Chicago skyline glittered like a jagged crown, its towering skyscrapers piercing the night sky. Inside a penthouse atop one of those glass giants, Amara Jackson sat bound to a sleek metal chair, her wrists chafing against leather straps. The room was a study in excess marble floors, velvet curtains, a crystal chandelier, casting cold light across her face. The air reeked of cigar smoke and Malcolm Sterling's overpriced cologne, a cloying mix that made her stomach turn. Her head throbbed from the sedative they'd used to knock her out, but her eyes burned with defiance. She wasn't prey. Not now, not ever. Malcolm lounged across from her, a glass of scotch in hand, his blonde hair slicked back like a cheap movie villain. His tuxedo was wrinkled, a sign of the chaos she'd caused before they'd subdued her. You're a hard woman to pin down, Amara, he said, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. But I always get what I want. She leaned forward, her voice steel despite the ache in her skull. You're dreaming, loser. You'll never own me. His smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, swirling his drink. Oh, I don't need to own you. I just need you to play your part. The Jackson-Sterling merger is bigger than both of us. He leaned closer, his breath hot and sour. And trust me, sweetheart, You'll learn to behave." Amara's jaw clenched, her fingers twitching against the straps. She'd taken out 2 of his men in the parking garage before they'd jabbed her with the needle. Her knife had found one's shoulder, her fist, another's jaw. But there'd been too many, and she'd been careless. Now trapped in this gilded cage, she felt the weight of her choices. Ethan's face flashed in her mind, his blue eyes, his fierce promise in Big Sur. "We fight together." She clung to that even as fear gnawed at her. The city lights pulsed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, their cold glow reflecting off the marble. Amara's eyes darted to the door, calculating. She'd faced worse odds before. All she needed was an opening. Hours earlier, Chicago's South Loop. The chase had been a blur of adrenaline and instinct. Ethan Caldwell gripped the wheel of his black SUV, the engine roaring as he weaved through Chicago's rain-slicked streets. The city's neon signs bled into the night, red, blue, green casting fleeting shadows across his face. Javier Morales sat in the passenger seat, his laptop open, fingers flying across the keys. "Got a hit," Javier said, his voice tight. Unmarked van, last seen heading toward the Loop Plates match. Malcolm's crew. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the wheel, his jaw set, where his voice was a low growl barely audible over the screech of tires as he took a sharp turn. "Penthouse on Wabash," Javier said, glancing at him. "You sure about this, man? Malcolm's not alone. He's got muscle." Ethan's eyes didn't leave the road. "He took her, Javier. That's all I need to know." Javier blew out a breath, popping his gum. "All right, but if we die, I'm haunting you." The SUV skidded to a stop outside a sleek high-rise, its glass facade shimmering under the streetlights. Ethan was out before the engine died, his black coat billowing as he strode toward the entrance. The lobby guard barely had time to blink before Ethan's fist connected with his jaw, sending him crumpling to the floor. Javier followed, muttering. Subtle, real, subtle. They took the service elevator, the hum of machinery filling the silence. Ethan checked his gun, his movements precise, but his mind was on Amara. The way she'd looked at him in Big Sur, her lips soft against his, her voice trembling with trust. He'd promised to protect her, and he'd failed. The thought burned, fueling the cold rage in his chest. "Ethan," Javier said, his voice low, "there's something you need to know. I screwed up." He hesitated, his usual bravado gone. "I worked for Malcolm years ago. Small jobs, nothing big. But he's got dirt on me. That's how he knew where to find her." Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. "You sold her out." "No." Javier raised his hands, his voice urgent. "I didn't know it was her. I swear. When I figured it out, I came clean. That's why I'm here, man. To fix this." Ethan's fist clenched, but he forced it down. "You're here now," he said, his voice icy. "But if she's hurt, you're answering to me." The elevator dinged and the doors slid open to a hallway lined with armed guards. Ethan didn't hesitate. The first went down with a single shot, the second with a brutal elbow to the face. Javier covered him, his own gun flashing in the dim light. The air filled with the sharp crack of gunfire, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and the thud of bodies hitting the floor. Ethan moved like a machine, his focus razor-sharp. Amara was close. He could feel it. Back in the penthouse. Amara worked the straps, her fingers straining against the leather. She'd found a loose buckle, a small victory, but it was enough. Malcolm was distracted, pacing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, Mother, it's handled," he said, his voice tight. "She's not going anywhere." Amara's blood ran cold. Mother Lila Caldwell was in on this. The betrayal stung, but it fueled her resolve. She twisted her wrist, the buckle giving way, and her heart leapt. One hand free, she kept her face neutral, her eyes fixed on Malcolm as he turned back to her. "You're wasting your time," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Ethan's coming for me." Malcolm laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the marble. "Ethan. He's too busy playing CEO to care about you. You're nothing to him, Amara. Just a distraction." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Keep telling yourself that?" The door exploded inward, splintering under a brutal kick. Ethan stormed in, his gun, raised his eyes, locking onto Amara. The sight of her bound, bruised but unbroken, sent a surge of relief and rage through him. "Let her go, Malcolm," he said, his voice deadly calm. Malcolm spun his scotch glass, shattering on the floor. "You!" He spat, his face twisting with fury. "You always have to ruin everything, don't you?" He yanked a pistol from his waistband, aiming it at Amara's chest. One step, and she's done. Ethan froze his gun steady, but his eyes flicked to Amara. She gave him the slightest nod, her free hand hidden behind her. "Trust me," her gaze said. He held his ground, his voice low. "She was never yours, Malcolm. She never will be, Malcolm's." Laugh was manic. "You think you're better than me? You're nothing without me propping you up." He stepped closer to Amara, the gun shaking in his hand. "She's mine, Ethan. And if I can't have her..." Amara moved. Her free hand shot out, grabbing a shard of glass from the broken scotch bottle on the floor. She slashed at Malcolm's arm, the blade biting deep. He howled, staggering back, blood dripping onto the marble. Ethan lunged, tackling him to the ground, his fist connecting with Malcolm's jaw in a sickening crunch. But the fight wasn't over. The door swung open, and Lila Caldwell stepped inside, her silver hair immaculate, her eyes cold as steel. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Ethan, stop this." Ethan froze his hand, still gripping Malcolm's collar. "You," he said, his voice raw with betrayal. "You helped him." Lila's lips thinned. "I did what was necessary. She's not one of us." "Ethan, she'll destroy everything we've built." Amara now, free from the straps, stood, her chest heaving. "You don't get to decide who I am," she said, her voice fierce. She stepped forward, glass shard still in hand, her eyes locked on Lila. "And you don't get to control him." Ethan released Malcolm, standing to face his mother. "You betrayed Dad," he said, his voice low, venomous. "And now you're betraying me. I'm done with your games, Mom." "I choose her." Lila's face paled, but before she could respond, Javier burst in, his gun raised. "We've got company," he said, his voice tight. More of Malcolm's guys coming up the elevator. Amara's eyes met Ethan's, a silent understanding passing between them. She grabbed a fallen guard's knife, its weight familiar in her hand. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Ethan nodded his hand, brushing hers as he handed her a spare clip. The touch was fleeting, but it grounded her, a reminder of the promise they'd made in Big Sur. "Together," he said, his voice firm. They fought their way out, a blur of motion and instinct. Amara's knife flashed, her movements precise, while Ethan's gun barked each shot, finding its mark. Javier covered their rear, his usual humor replaced by grim focus. The hallway was a war zone, shattered glass, flickering lights, the sharp tang of blood in the air. Amara's heart pounded, but she felt alive, unstoppable, with Ethan at her side. They reached the stairwell, the city's neon glow spilling through a broken window. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her close, his breath hot against her ear. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough with worry. She nodded her hand, brushing his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart. The contact was electric, a spark in the chaos. "I'm fine," she said, her voice soft but sure. Thanks to you. His eyes darkened, a flicker of hunger beneath the concern. For a moment the world fell away and she felt the pull of him, the heat of his body, the intensity in his gaze. Her fingers lingered on his chest, the damp fabric clinging to his skin, and she imagined what it would be like to close the distance to taste him again. But the sound of footsteps snapped her back, and she stepped away, her pulse racing. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady despite the fire in her veins. They made it to the street, the SUV waiting in the shadows. Javier slid into the driver's seat, Ethan and Amara in the back. The city blurred past its lights, a dizzying dance of color. Amara leaned against Ethan, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. His arm draped around her, his fingers tracing small circles on her shoulder, a silent reassurance. The contact was warm grounding, and she let herself sink into it just for a moment. "Lila," Ethan said, his voice low, breaking the silence. "She's not done. She'll come for us." Amara nodded, her eyes fixed on the city. "Let her. We'll be ready." Javier glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his grin returning. "You two are going to give me a heart attack, you know that." Ethan's lips twitched a rare smile. "You'll live." Amara's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining. The city's pulse thrummed around them, but in that moment, it was just the two of them bound by a promise forged in fire. Malcolm was down, but the war wasn't over. Lila's betrayal, Javier's confession, the secret still lingering. They were all storms on the horizon. But with Ethan's hand in hers, Amara felt something she hadn't in years. Hope. The Savannah air was heavy with the scent of magnolia blossoms, their creamy petals glowing under the golden light of a setting sun. The Jackson family's estate sprawled across acres of Georgia countryside, its white columns and wraparound porch a nod to old Southern charm. Amara Jackson stood in the grand dining room, her chin high, her black dress hugging her curves like a second skin. The chandelier above cast soft shadows across her ebony skin, and her eyes sharp and unyielding, locked onto her mother Serena, who sat at the head of the table, a glass of bourbon in hand. "You ran?" Serena said, her voice calm but laced with steel. "And now you're back with him." She glanced at Ethan, Caldwell, who stood beside Amara, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. His navy suit was tailored to perfection, but his blue eyes were hard, daring anyone to challenge him. Amara's lips curved into a defiant smile. "I didn't run from you, Mom. I ran from a cage. And today I'm here to tell you I'm choosing my own path." She paused, her hand finding Ethan's, their fingers intertwining. With him, Serena's eyes narrowed, but there was a flicker of something softer. Pride, maybe, or reluctant respect. "You think it's that simple? The Sterlings won't let this go. Malcolm's licking his wounds. But he's not done. Let him try." Ethan said, his voice low, a quiet menace that filled the room. "He touches her. He's a dead man." The room fell silent. The only sound, the distant chirp of crickets and the clink of ice in Serena's glass. Amara's father, Roland, sat at the other end of the table, his expression unreadable. Her sister Nia leaned against the wall, her braids swaying as she grinned. "Told y'all she'd shake things up," Nia said, her voice light but proud. Serena set her glass down, leaning forward. "You're my daughter, Amara. I want what's best for you. But this," she gestured to Ethan, "he's not one of us. His world, his family, they'll tear you apart." Amara's grip on Ethan's hand tightened. "You don't get to decide what's best for me anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I've spent my life proving I'm more than your perfect heiress. I've fought for my freedom, and I'm fighting for this. For us." Ethan's thumb brushed her knuckles, a silent reassurance. "She's not alone," he said, his eyes never leaving Serena's. "I'm all in." Serena studied them, her lips thinning. Then with a slow exhale, she leaned back. "You're as stubborn as I was," she said, a hint of a smile breaking through. "Fine, but don't expect me to make it easy." Amara's heart lifted a weight she hadn't realized she carried easing. "Wouldn't dream of it," she said, her smile mirroring her mother's. A week later, New York City glittered under a velvet sky, its lights a dazzling contrast to Savannah's quiet charm. Central Park was a haven of calm, its paths lined with lanterns that cast a warm glow across the Bow Bridge. Amara walked beside Ethan, her leather jacket open to reveal a fitted red top, her boots crunching on the gravel. The air was crisp, scented with fallen leaves and the faint hum of the city beyond. A lone violinist played nearby, the notes of a slow melody weaving through the night. "You're awfully quiet," Amara said, nudging Ethan's arm. "What's on your mind, Caldwell?" He glanced at her, his lips twitching. "You," he said simply, his voice low and warm. "Always you." She laughed, the sound bright in the quiet, smooth talker. "You're gonna have to do better than that." He stopped walking, turning to face her. The lantern light caught the sharp angles of his face, his blue eyes intense, almost glowing. "All right," he said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "How's this?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box, and dropped to one knee. Amara's breath caught her heart, stuttering. "Ethan." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that sparkled like a star, its facets catching the light. "I saw you that night in New York," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Leaping from that window, fearless, unstoppable. I didn't know your name, but I knew you were different. You fought for your freedom, Amara, and you made me want to fight for something real." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I want to fight for us, for our future. Will you marry me?" The world seemed to pause, the violin's notes fading into a soft hum. Amara's eyes stung, but her smile was radiant. "You're making it really hard to say no," she said, her voice trembling with laughter and love. "Is that a yes?" he asked, a grin breaking through. She nodded, her voice soft, but sure. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, its cool metal, a perfect fit, and stood pulling her into his arms. His lips found hers, the kiss slow and deep, a promise sealed under the stars. Her hands slid up his chest, feeling the steady thud of his heart, and she pressed closer, the warmth of him grounding her. The city's pulse thrummed in the distance, but here on this bridge, it was just them, bound by a love that had weathered every storm. The wedding was a celebration of love and defiance held at a sprawling estate outside Savannah. The grounds were draped in magnolia garlands, their creamy blooms glowing under strings of fairy lights. A jazz band played soulful melodies, the saxophone weaving through the warm night air, and tables groaned under platters of low-country cuisine, shrimp and grits, collard greens, cornbread dripping with honey. Amara stood at the center of it all, her white gown, a vision of lace and silk, her hair adorned with tiny pearls. Her skin glowed under the lights, and her smile was brighter than the stars above. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off her. He stood by her side, his black tuxedo sharp and timeless, his hand never straying far from hers. Nia, in a vibrant yellow dress, was the maid of honor, her laughter infectious as she toasted the couple. "To my sister," she said, raising a glass of champagne, "who fought like hell and found her home." Javier, Ethan's best man, chimed in, his grin wide, and to Ethan, who finally learned to chill out, "Cheers, man." The crowd laughed, but Amara's eyes were on her mother. Serena stood at the edge of the dance floor, her expression soft. A far cry from the woman who'd once tried to control her. Lila Caldwell was there too. Her presence a quiet acknowledgement of change. After Chicago, she'd stepped back, her silence a grudging acceptance of Ethan's choice. Amara met her gaze and Lila offered a small nod, a truce, if not a surrender. As the band struck up a slow song, Ethan pulled Amara onto the dance floor. His hand settled on her waist, his fingers warm through the lace, and she leaned into him, her cheek against his chest. The music wrapped around them, a soulful melody that spoke of love and resilience. "You look like a dream," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. She tilted her head, her eyes sparkling. "You're not so bad yourself." Caldwell. Her hand slid up his arm, feeling the strength beneath his tuxedo, and she felt a familiar heat stir in her chest. "You sure you can handle me?" His laugh was low, a rumble that sent shivers down her spine. "I'm counting on it." Later that night, in a private suite overlooking the estate, the world was theirs alone. The room was bathed in the soft glow of candles, their flames casting golden shadows across the walls. Amara stood by the window, her gown replaced by a silk slip that clung to her curves, its ivory fabric shimmering against her skin. The air was warm, scented with jasmine from the gardens below, and the distant hum of the band drifted through the open window. Ethan stepped behind her, his hands settling on her hips, his breath warm against her neck. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice a husky whisper, "you're making it hard to behave." She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest, unbuttoning his shirt with deliberate slowness. "Who said I want you to behave?" She teased, her voice low, her eyes locked on his. The candlelight danced in his gaze, a fire that matched the one burning inside her. His hands roamed her back, tracing the curve of her spine, and she shivered, her skin alive under his touch. He kissed her slow and deep, his lips tasting of champagne and promises. The silk slip shifted under his fingers, the fabric whispering against her skin, and she pressed closer, her body molding to his. His breath was ragged, his hands firm but gentle, and every touch felt like a vow, steady, unbreakable, eternal. The world outside faded, replaced by the rhythm of their breaths, the soft creak of the floorboards, the flicker of candlelight on their skin. His lips trailed down her neck, leaving a path of heat, and she arched into him, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice a mix of need and love, and he answered with a kiss that stole her breath, a silent promise of forever. They didn't rush, savoring every moment, every touch. The candles burned low, their light softening the edges of the room, and the night wrapped around them, a cocoon of warmth and love. It wasn't just passion, it was trust, a bond forged through battles and choices, a love that had defied every odd. A year later, a small house in the Hudson Valley buzzed with life. The nursery was painted in soft blues and yellows, a mobile of stars spinning above a crib where baby Hope slept, her tiny chest rising and falling. Amara stood in the doorway, her hair in a loose braid, her smile tired but radiant. Ethan slipped an arm around her waist, his lips brushing her temple. "She's perfect," he said, his voice thick with awe. "Just like her mom," Amara said, leaning into him. The house was a far cry from the penthouses and estates of their past, but it was home, a place built on love, not expectations. Serena and Lila had come around their visits marked by cautious warmth. Serena brought gumbo and stories of Atlanta, while Lila offered quiet advice, her sharp edges softened by Hope's gummy smiles. Nia was a regular, her paintings brightening the walls, and Javier dropped by with bad jokes and tech gadgets for the baby. Amara looked at Ethan, his face softened by the nursery's glow, and felt a peace she'd never known. She'd run from a cage, fought for her freedom, and found something greater, a love that didn't bind her, but set her free. "We did good, didn't we?" she said, her voice soft. He kissed her slow and sure, his hand resting on her hip. We did better than good, he said, his smile a promise. We did forever. Did Amara and Ethan's journey touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? Their fiery battles or their tender love? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button to join the Soul Stories family. Let's keep exploring stories that ignite the soul.